So here is my entire business in a box, literally. And I'm going to write out the rest of this process. It's basically drawn out like an onion on purpose, but I didn't finish the outer layer yet because I want to show you guys I know what the I'm talking about. Now, I'm going to move the camera angle here just so I have some room on the side to kind of show you the whatnots without being in the way. But the basic idea, what you need to understand is I run a YouTube marketing agency. I'm making YouTube videos. It kind of feeds itself. And if you want to understand how to flowchart your own business to find the most common problems and issues and bottlenecks you need to solve, then this is step one as a follow-up to the last video that I did, where you'll notice I was recording on a roof. And if you're curious to see what the heck I was doing literally on top of a roof in the middle of a suburban neighborhood where the neighbor was like, "What are you doing?" But he ended up listening to the video and said the video was pretty good, maybe you should check that out in the top right-hand corner of the video. But that being said, this is a follow-up to that to show you exactly what it looks like to mastermind out what your videos look like. Or sorry, what your content looks like. But you could do the same thing for content process if you wanted to. But you could also just copy this because that's basically what we do. So that being said, I'm basically building up my entire business in a box. This central section right here is the content cycle that we use for creating YouTube videos. And the basic idea is it takes you from step 0 all the way to phase 7. So I call them phases, actually 0 to 7, to creating every single YouTube video. Then outside of that is month-to-month production improvements and client meetings and how we're adjusting our strategy every single month. And then on top of that is the actual client life cycle. So I'm going to be explaining all of that and then how you can use that to find bottlenecks in your business and really just take care of business and what needs to get done. And most importantly, just find what works. And in this context, I think the most value I can provide is find what you need to improve in your content creation process. So I'm just going to start at the top for you guys. The basic idea is with anything in the business, you need to know who your clients are. So the first thing we're always going to do is start with data collection. This could be old clients that you've worked with before or just random people you're surveying that are in your target market. So for me, it's going to be real estate investors, and I talked to my brother and I'm trying to get out there and do more networking events, but I also have a client who's in the real estate investment space and I have family in the space. So doing that sort of research is going to be step 1. You should be past all this, so I'm going to breeze through it. Then you're going to refine your product or build your product if you don't have one. You're going to turn that into an offer. So how are people actually going to pay for it? How much do they pay? What are their benefits? What's your sales process? Now, this is where it gets fun. Lead generation. You're going to have to go and find the leads. You're going to have to go source them. However you do it, I'm not going to get into details of that. Again, this is going to stay high level. I'm just trying to break down the idea for you of what a process is in your business, which is basically any sort of step that you could break down at a high level into what a component of your business is. For example, if you could hire one person to do this full time, then that is considered a process. If it's something that is more so broad, like sales, technically yes, you could hire a person to do that, but if you just told them, this is what I want you to do, sales, and they end up doing it different than your exact vision, then that's how you know you need to break it down on a more finite level. That's kind of my rule of thumb, is if it can't be broken down any simpler and a person could easily recreate it by looking at the same general process step, and you just give them some basic instructions for each of these processes, then you've probably broken it down enough, and now it's more about just coming up with solutions to the problems. So that being said, lead gen. What do we do after lead gen? Well, we need to reach out to the leads, so we'll just call that outreach. All right, again, very basic. I'm trying to be more high level with this outer layer of the business. After outreach, we get into sales. Sales, we close the client. So what happens when you close the client? You onboard them. So we have client onboarding, which is kind of a series of multiple steps. So I'm actually going to break that down like I just said I would for things like that. So when we onboard a client, I'm just going to kind of box that in to show that it's a bit of a bigger process. What that really looks like is we're firstly going to send them I'm just going to write it as the OB for onboarding form to set them up with our, technically our battle plan is what it's called, but what we're firstly going to do after the onboarding form is filled out is we're going to start their industry research right after their onboarding form is filled out, and then we're going to have an onboarding call. All right? And again, this is going to be different for your business, your personal brand. However, you need to record your content, whatever types of content you make, break it down to your smallest levels or pieces. Or if you can make one document or one call or one process or one job for someone to do, break it down to that level. And we'll get into the more specifics again as we continue through this. And basically all of that kind of gets consolidated into kind of like onboarding, if that makes sense. And then also that helps us to create our battle plan, which is basically the same thing as this in here. So I'm just going to kind of put like a note that this basically kind of goes in there. All right, now the cycle continues to repeat itself outside of even the main fulfillment that we have. So I'm also just going to kind of continue talking about what happens after that, but I will kind of, well, maybe I'll come back to that in a second. The basic idea is after we've onboarded a client, then we get into their battle plan and we focus on doing competition research. So looking at the other channels that are successful in their industry. Once we have a marketing plan, that's basically what our battle plan is. We just have a military theme. We do keyword research, we do topic research, come up with new ideas for them to produce. They approve them, and then these are our 7 different video production phases. Again, this video isn't really focused on the video production phases necessarily. The importance of this is more so to come up with something that visualizes your business correctly. So I think I've done a good job at overall kind of showing that to you guys. The basic rest of the process that I was going to write out is whenever we lose a client or offboard them, then it basically goes to client offboarding, testimonial securing, and then getting more data collection, and the cycle repeats. So you kind of get the basic idea there. And really what I wanted to show you was the process of coming up with each phase of your business. So now that you've kind of understood that, I would say the simplest way to break this down, since this is a channel focused on YouTube creators, what you really want to be able to do now is kind of look at any of these common phases that you have and look for or think about the most common issues just in a day-to-day. This isn't inherently useful just sitting here on this wall. So this is why I'd recommend the next thing to do, and maybe I'll do this in a future video, is break this down on Lucid chart. This is just a visualization for myself, honestly. But you could basically break it down on a Lucid chart. Then whenever you have a moment or you notice that like, hey, the copywriter wrote something that the client doesn't like, and turns out there's actually 3 different ways that clients like videos being outlined and copywritten, true story by the way, then we take a note of that, and that's a process that needs to be improved. And then what we can do is ignore the rest of this, zoom in on the most central layer, and start coming up with a process and a Google Drive folder that basically has all the SOPs, all the trainings, all the automations needed, or I spend my time training a person to take care of those things. In that case, it would be the copywriter. So that's literally all you have to do. You basically just have to have the layers of your business well written out. You have to understand, okay, cool, this is an onboarded client, so none of this really matters. Boom, now we need to go into the client process month to month. All right, is this month to month or a week to week issue? Well, copywriting is a video production week to week issue, so we're gonna zoom in here. And obviously the issue is copywriting, so we know where to go. And you can zoom out from there for bigger and bigger problems. Say you have your overall process working, but then you realize clients aren't happy with results. Well, you would zoom out from the day-to-day process and focus on the month-to-month and look for your data and your analytics, and you need to improve those kind of things. So this is a very useful visualization to be able to understand where your current problems are and to be able to zoom in and out on what's important and what's not. And this is actually a philosophy adapted from Toyota. This is literally how they improve their process control. This is how they beat out Ford in having higher quality production, right? And something that's actually really interesting here is I would bet you that like 50% of all this is actually batshit useless. So I need to take the time and actually go in and simplify this, because for a business that makes not enough money, in my opinion, I need to simplify this even more. And that's a lot of how Toyota's philosophy works as well, is they don't just ask what's not working, they ask what's not necessary. And this is a big thing in SpaceX as well in their philosophy. But basically, you know, Toyota's philosophy was, if we can do something right from the beginning and we can fit the door on the car right, for example, then we don't need to do what Ford does, which is they then pay an extra person and they buy these hammers to hammer the door in place to make sure it's perfect. It's like, why not just get it right from the beginning? So this is gonna help you do that. Hopefully this was helpful, guys. And I will catch you in the next one. Subscribe if you want more. Peace.